Digestive system is to break down nutrients, and we started in the mouth. So what function do we want to remember about the mouth?
Mechanical breakdown of food.
Sure, so what do we call that? Mastication. So we're going to break it down to do what? What's the benefit of breaking it into smaller pieces?
Increased surface area.
Increased surface area. What kind of tooth is the front tooth, which is flat and sharp, used for cutting? It's an incisor. And what are the names of the teeth in the back that are used for grinding?
Molars.
Those are molars. Okay, we get to the stomach. Before we get out of the mouth, digestion of what macromolecule begins in the mouth?
Carbohydrates.
Carbohydrates with what enzyme? Salivary
Amylase.
Amylase. Okay, then we make it to the stomach. Well, digestion of what macromolecule occurs in the stomach? Proteins. And why is the stomach a good environment for the digestion of proteins? What? Okay. Pepsin, and what's the other thing in gastric juice? Hydrochloric acid. So what happens to the hydrogen bonds, which cause the proteins to fold up when they're exposed to low pH acid? It's called denaturation. You lose those hydrogen bonds. So it breaks them open, and it makes it really easy for the digestive enzymes to get at them. Okay, then we made it to the small intestine. There's three parts to the small intestine. What's the name of the first segment? It's about a foot long.
Duodenum.
Duodenum. What is the main thing that you want to remember happens in the duodenum?
Neutralizes acid.
There you go. So you're going to receive the secretions from both the liver, gallbladder, and from the pancreas. So the pancreas secretes bicarbonate and phosphate buffers, which neutralize the acid, and then we're going to receive bile coming from the liver. What's the name of the second section of the small intestine? Jejunum. And what's the jejunum known for? Did you say jejunum? You crossbred two words there. We can't get a mule out of the donkey and the horse. All right. So what do we want to remember about the jejunum? Number one area where you have chemical digestion and absorption. What is the name of the sphincter that hooks the small intestine up to the large intestine? Pyloric is between the stomach and the duodenum. It's named after the last section of small intestine and the first part, ileocecal valve. Ileum is the last section of the small intestine. Cecum is the first part of the large intestine. And that brings us up to where we ended, with the large intestine. So, not to be a smart butt, but why do you think they call it the large intestine? Because it's slightly bigger than the small intestine. Okay, now it's not longer, it's just larger in diameter. The small intestine is 18 to 20 feet long, large intestine is only about 5 foot long. As you look at the functions, pretty short and sweet. We got to secrete mucus. Mucus is necessary because we don't want constipation to occur. Second of all, we're going to absorb the water and electrolytes from the chyme. So chyme is very soupy. So we're going to basically dehydrate the chyme, and we're going to, in a layman's terminology, create turds from it. So the only way we can do that is to dehydrate it. So reabsorbing water is a huge important function of the large intestine. We're also going to absorb some of the vitamins created by the microbiome. Now this is actually a new study area of the human body. The bacteria of the large intestine, which is what we call the microbiome, we are finding out is super important to our health. And we're going to cover that in just a little more, in just a bit. And last of all, once we dehydrate it and we pack it into feces, defecation is a very important function of the large intestine. So anatomically, let's take a look at this. This is what you did in lab this week. So this blind end pouch right here is called the cecum. Attached to the cecum is the appendix. From the ileocecal valve on up is ascending colon. That which goes across, transverse. The part of the colon that goes down is descending, 45-degree angle, sigmoid, ending in 6 inches of rectum, and then anal sphincters. So just as a heads up, in your labs this week, I graded kindly on that label that was put right here. Because there was a label right here, and technically it should have been ascending colon, but some of you labeled it cecum. Cecum is really only from the ileocecal valve down. That's that blind end pouch. So if it's ever above the ileocecal valve, it's going to be part of the ascending colon. Now let's do a quick review. In our first lecture, we learned about the 4 basic tissue layers that the tube has from beginning to end. The inside was called the mucosa. Underneath that was submucosa. And you had the muscularis externa and serosa. The muscularis externa had 2 layers of muscle. A circular layer for squeezing and a longitudinal layer for shortening. If you look here on the colon, it's slightly different. You see these taenia coli? Those are actually the longitudinal muscles. So they come in 3 bands. So imagine we're here, okay? If these bands tightened up, what would happen to the shape of this part of the colon? It's going to straighten up a little bit like this. Okay, now when would that happen? When feces enters the rectal vault, causes stretching, you're about to have a mass movement. You're about to defecate. So when those bands tighten up, it creates pretty much a slide. Right out the poop chute. So that's what your taenia coli are for. They are to provide you with mass movements. These little structures called hostra, okay, they are really important for helping to reabsorb the vitamins and the water, because that's more of the circular mushing it back and forth. So we'll basically compact it and dehydrate it until you form the turds in the hostra, okay? I hate to say such common layperson's terminology, but I don't know what's another professional name for a turd. I don't know. That's the only word that I know for them. All right, so how do you feel about the anatomy of the large intestine? Fairly straightforward. And why was it that you're not going to be all tough if you feel pain in your lower right quadrant? Because if that booger blows up, what are you going to have in your abdominal pelvic cavity? Feces, along with 500 different species of bacteria, which would not be cool for homeostasis. All right, this sphincter here at the end, the anal sphincter, there's 2. There's an external and then there's also an internal. I want you to understand this concept because this has to do with defecation and potty training. The internal sphincter is made out of smooth muscle. Remember, smooth muscle is called involuntary because you can't control it? So this is controlled by a reflex. This one, your external anal sphincter, because it's skeletal muscle, you have voluntary control over it. So that loosening of that is controlled by your brain. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we get into the defecation reflex. The next topic I wanted to cover real quickly is hemorrhoids. So are hemorrhoids a fairly common problem in our society? Yeah, lots of people have hemorrhoids. They're basically varicose veins around the anus. So they're swollen veins that create itching and pain. Common causes include straining during bowel movement. So this technique is so common they give it a name. It's called the Valsalva maneuver. And that is just what you're thinking of when you're sitting on the toilet and you bear down, you close off your glottis, and you that's the Valsalva maneuver. You also do that during childbirth. One of the main reasons that people do that, they strain during defecation, is because they don't have enough fiber in their diet. At fiber, you guys ever heard of psyllium? So psyllium is the type of fiber that I take. It's just this raw husk stuff that we can't metabolize. And when I consume psyllium, it's part soluble and part insoluble fiber. I don't know how any other way to say it, but it just greases up the poop chute. Nothing sticks. It coats your entire colon with mucus, and it's just like, whoa, stuff just comes right on out. It is amazing what happens to your defecation process when you have adequate amounts of fiber. It's very, very important to keep you regular. Now, obesity contributes to hemorrhoids. Pregnancy, especially when you're giving birth to the child. So it can happen during pregnancy if that baby is laying on your vena cava. That can stop return blood flow, creating varicose veins, but then the process of having the baby, usually you're bearing down to get the baby out, and that will create these. So there's internal hemorrhoids, and that's when these blood vessels would stay inside the rectum, but they can also go outside, and there's external hemorrhoids. Now I want to talk to you briefly because I gave you the clue to this in lab this week. Why would straining, obesity, pregnancy, why would it cause a hemorrhoid? Let's link the physiology to this. What is it about those behaviors that causes a hemorrhoid to develop? Okay, pressure is where we're going to start. Remember when we talked and I compared the vena cava at the heart to the aorta? What was the difference between those two blood vessels? The walls. So the aorta was really muscly and tough because it dealt with high blood pressure. The vena cava had thin walls because your veins are not supposed to have high blood pressure in them. So when you bear down, the Valsalva maneuver, what are you doing to the pressure inside your abdominal pelvic cavity? Increasing it tremendously. So it can't help but increase the pressure in these vessels which were not designed to handle high pressure. So how do they react? They expand, they distend, and become all swollen. That is what actually causes the hemorrhoids. Now if you're giving birth to a child, can you help but bear down? No, you have to do it. But if you are having to bear down when you are defecating, and it can be fixed by simply eating more fiber in your diet, then there is something that you can do about it, because hemorrhoids aren't something that you want to experience. You know those little blow-up donuts? That's what those are for. You sit on those so you don't have to sit on your hemorrhoids because they freaking hurt. And you're all sitting there going, I'm not going to get hemorrhoids. You talk the talk, just make sure you walk the walk. Eat your fiber and you won't have to deal with hemorrhoids. I had a buddy that had hemorrhoids, and it wreaked havoc in his life. He was not a happy camper having those little things hanging out of his ass. All right, so I want to get across the point. Nutrient digestion and the large intestine. Does the large intestine absorb a lot of nutrients? No, it does not. As far as carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins are concerned, it absorbs very little. The main thing that your large intestine is absorbing is water, and then it produces a whole lot of mucus. When we have a process of defecating or depositing feces, that process is called a mass movement. So when those Taenia coli contract, causing the feces to fall away from the body, that process is a mass movement. Okay, I want to talk briefly, or actually a little bit in depth, about the bacteria that live in your gut, because this is becoming a new and exploding field of science. We did not know how important this microbiome or gut bacteria were until recently. So if you look at these numbers, the large intestine hosts 10 times more bacteria than cells in the human body. That's a lot of bacteria in your colon, a lot of bacteria. And this is called a symbiotic relationship. So for those of you who have not had much science before this, if you are experiencing symbiosis with another organism, it means that you are living together and you benefit from each other. So we act as a host for these bacteria in our gut, and then the bacteria give us back things in return. Number one, they provide competition in our gut. Because of these 500 species, most of these are good for us. They are helpful to have in our body. So by having them present in our gut, they create competition and they keep out the bad gut bacteria. Now I'm going to do something that you're not used to with me, I'm gonna show you an animated video, a cartoon about gut bacteria. And I want you to pay attention to this discussion. So what do these gut bacteria do for you? They produce vitamins, such as vitamin K, which is necessary for blood clotting, and we get about half of our vitamin K from our gut bacteria. We also get one of the B vitamins, which helps us create energy. Besides that, these gut bacteria can metabolize undigested materials, what we call soluble fiber. So have you ever noticed sometimes that when some people eat beans, what's the result? They get a little gassy. That's because those bacteria are metabolizing and eating that food that we don't have the enzymes for. They create competition, and so therefore they deter the growth of harmful bacteria. And we're seeing that this bacteria is important for stimulation of the immune system. Long-term oral antibiotic therapy can disrupt the flora, may lead to Clostridium difficile, C. diff. Okay, antibiotics are indiscriminate. They will help to destroy any bacteria. They don't have a specific target. So as you take oral antibiotics, they just randomly destroy many of the different strains of bacteria in your gut. You then need to repopulate, if possible. Give it the food that it needs to help repopulate and build back the healthy bacteria. Now I know that we have tablets that you can take with probiotics or bacteria in there. At this point in time, we are not seeing that they are all that effective. Now we may get better at growing the right strains and getting them into your gut, but right now it doesn't look like probiotics do that much. Eating a good diet, which gives those bacteria the right food, is important. And the other thing that we're seeing, which is kind of new, children who are born naturally, in other words, vaginal births, they believe that that inoculates the body of that new infant with the bacteria that they will often keep for the rest of their lives. Because we are seeing a lot of bad health issues associated with C-section babies. So we're starting to think that as that baby travels through the vaginal birth canal, that it is inoculated with the bacteria that are necessary to help develop and maintain a healthy immune system. So let's take a look here at my little animated cartoon, and I hope that you understand that even though this is kind of fun on the outside, there's a serious undertone to what these gut bacteria do.
The next time you look in the mirror, think about this. In many ways, you're more microbe than human. There are 10 times more cells from microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi, than human cells in and on our bodies. And our genes are outnumbered 100 to 1 by microbial genes. Scientists even have a name for all these microbial genes, the human microbiome. Now, this might make a lot of people rush for the hand sanitizer. But it turns out most of these microorganisms aren't bad, germs that will make us sick. Most are good. And without these good microbes, our bodies don't seem to do as well. We don't seem to be as healthy, and we actually might get sick more often. So one question is, where do our microbiomes come from in the first place? Well, like a lot of things, it starts with our mothers. As the infant passes through the birth canal, it gets coated with microbes from the mom. These microbes may kind of seed the baby with just the right mix. Combined with bacteria in breast milk and other microbes we encounter early on, they seem to slowly take shape in our first few years of life. The overall mix of our microbes becomes very personal, sort of like a fingerprint or maybe a blood type. But our microbes tend to resemble those of our parents and siblings and may stay with us for much of our lives. They may also be doing all sorts of things, such as educating our immune cells, like this one, teaching them the difference between things they should fight off, bad bugs that might make us sick, and things that aren't a threat, like our good microbes. adults, microbes become our first line of defense, fighting off germs that try to invade our bodies, protecting their turf while protecting our health. Scientists have discovered they can even spew out their own antibiotics. The types of microbes in your body vary depending on exactly where they live, like different ecosystems in nature. There are wet places like our mouths, noses, and armpits, oily places like our scalps and backs, and dry places like our forearms. Different species of microbes have adapted to each of these habitats. The biggest, most important microbial habitat seems to be in the gut. It's the most complex, the most diverse, and everything microbes are doing everywhere else in our bodies, fighting off infections, revving up and dampening down our immune systems, signaling cells, that's all happening in the gut in spades. They even seem to help regulate our metabolisms, how much energy we burn and how much fat we store. So if it's not functioning properly for some reason, because of what we eat, antibiotics we take, that may actually lead to all kinds of diseases. Diseases like colon cancer, colitis, maybe even diabetes and obesity. Some scientists think one reason a lot of diseases are increasing is because we've lost key gut microbes. Our microbiomes look far less diverse compared to those of people in less developed countries and earlier generations. And remember how we get our microbiomes in the first place? From our mothers when we're born and from breast milk? Well, some scientists think that too many babies aren't getting that because of all the C-sections and not enough breastfeeding, plus all the antibiotics kids get these days and our obsession with cleanliness. All this may help explain why problems like asthma and allergies have been soaring. Maybe because our microbiomes never taught our immune systems how to work the right way. Maybe swallowing good microbes, probiotics, could prevent and treat some diseases. So could taking prebiotics, essentially food that good microbes love. We end our story with a reminder. This research is really new. We still have a lot to learn about what many of our microbes are really doing. But scientists say that it's getting clearer and clearer that the tiny organisms all over our bodies are essential to our health and happiness.
Alright, let's see if I can get off of this now. Yeah, I had problems with numbers. It's not there we go. One more. Alright. Did you get the point? It's kind of silly, kind of goofy, but this is a brand new science. In our old textbook that I used in 145, 146, they had a case study. And so it was grandma. Grandma had been on oral antibiotics for a period of time, and since it had destroyed her gut biome, she got C. diff, and they could not get rid of the C. diff. Do you know how they fixed it? Cure. A fecal transplant from her granddaughter. So they basically took fecal samples from the granddaughter, and since it's family, you usually have related bacterial species because it's passed on from generation to generation, and they transplanted that feces into grandma. Those bacteria then took root, colonized, and because of the competition that they created, they forced out the bad pathogens. And that is now a common practice in healthcare to provide fecal transplants. So they're basically transplanting like stem cells of those bacterial colonies into your colon. I know it's kind of harsh to think about that, but that is now a medical procedure which is widely practiced to fix that. Are you getting the idea of how friggin' important these bacteria in your gut are? So take care of them. Feed them the foods that they need, and also. They're seeing a link between the lack of establishing a proper microbiome and many of the autoimmune diseases. Like when you look at celiac disease and the different types of colitis, they're thinking that there's probably a link in there someplace. All right. Large intestine, let's talk about this defecation reflex. Okay, so what is the stimulus? Now let me back up, because we've never talked about reflexes before. What is a reflex? It's an involuntary response. So it's something that is automatic for your body. Like when there's a bug flying at your eye, can you stop your eye from closing? No, because it's automatic. So there's a stimulus. That stimulus is sends a message to usually your spinal cord, and instead of your brain processing the information, your spinal cord processes it and sends a motor response back. So since it skips the brain, it makes it super fast. And these reflexes are designed to keep you happy, healthy, and safe. So the reflex we're going to talk about right now is the defecation reflex. The stimulus to trigger the defecation reflex is feces moving into the rectal vault. When feces moves in, it stretches out the rectum. That's a stimulus. That information is then sent to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord says, oh, it's time to defecate. So remember, you have two sphincters? The spinal cord sends a message back to relax your internal anal sphincter. That smooth muscle that you don't have any control of, it loosens it up. So now how many sphincters do you have holding the feces back? One. So by the time this happens, that original message has been sent to the brain. Hey, I need to go number 2. The brain has voluntary control over the external sphincter. So once this internal sphincter is relaxed, this is what you're doing. You're starting to do the dance, going, I gotta poop, gotta poop, gotta poop. And so you will find a proper location to then tell that external sphincter to relax. When it comes to teaching children about not pottying their britches anymore, what we call potty training, it's pretty much what you're teaching that child to do, to obtain voluntary control over that external sphincter. Who usually does better at potty training? Boys or girls?
In my experiences, I've had both, and then I've nannied boys.
Really? Interesting. So your experience is opposite what statistics prove.
Both my boys refused to go in the diaper right before, like they were about 18, 19 months old. They didn't want the diaper anymore. They wanted to do it. My daughter was like, but maybe she was the baby. But even with my cousins, I nannied them for 3 summers in a row during the potty training sessions. The girl, they're twins. The boy, easy. The girl,
Isn't that interesting? So I guess what it comes down to, it's a very individual thing. Children will choose when it's their time, whether it's male or female. So it's a crapshoot. And the sooner that they learn that art, the better off you are. Because changing during diapers, oh God, that was not one of my favorite things to do.
especially when they start eating regular food.
Man, you open up that diaper and you take a whiff of that, and it's just like you think you're gonna die. What's your experience?
Just babysitting.
Just babysitting? Gotcha.
Trying to teach them how to go to the bathroom when the toilet is rough. Especially boys, because he's lazy and he just pulls down his pants, starts peeing.
See, I made it a game. I put Cheerios in the toilet, and they aimed from the toilet, the Cheerios.
That's an interesting idea. Turn it into
Yeah.
a game. Something to stimulate them to do it.
Can't
Because I
really
could
do
see
that
the
with
little
girls.
boys too. Little boys like to pee wherever.
Yep.
But then I got little neighbor girls who also, I remember one of them. She was what, 6, 5 or 6? And she'd just go out in the middle of their backyard and poop right there.
Oh my
And walking around, and it's like, what's that? And it's like, oh, that's her feces.
My
My
roommate's
friends
daughter
do
does that still. It'll be freezing cold outside, and she'll be like, I'm just gonna go right here, and I'm like,
Yeah, you're like, just drop the drawers, they don't
go
care.
in the house! 5 feet away!
Interesting
My friend's
process.
nephew literally just pulled down his pants in the driveway in front of the garage. Not even in the grass, like.
See, I couldn't pay pay my kids to go to the bathroom outside. Just none of
See
them.
how different children are? This is where diversity of humans comes from. I get so frustrated with people who think that the diversity of humans is in the color of their skin or a race, because it's not. It's in the individual people of this world. That's where the diversity is. How many of us in here are like each other? None of us. That's where the diversity is. It has nothing to do with where you came from. It's just crazy that people can be that narrow. All right, let's talk about diarrhea and constipation. The causes. Okay, so since one of the major jobs of the colon is to absorb water, what would be the cause of diarrhea?
Dehydration. Oh, no, too much excess.
Too much motility. Move it through the colon too fast. You don't give the colon time enough to absorb the water content. So too much motility results in diarrhea. Okay, now that we've covered that, what's going to cause constipation? Moving through too slowly. You've got too much time to absorb it. So let's look at some reasons. You all know that getting sick can cause diarrhea. Get a viral or bacterial infection in your colon, that will definitely stimulate it because your body is trying to get rid of the pathogens and the toxins. But drugs can cause a reaction either way. Drugs can cause diarrhea and drugs can cause constipation. This is the one that I want to bring to your attention, because I was naive about this until I worked in the emergency room at Mercy. So, not to share too much with you, but this is A&P when we talk about bodily functions. I've never experienced constipation. I just assumed that everybody was regular, because I get up every morning, I smell the coffee, and I've got to go number 2. It's like, don't even have to drink it, just smell it, and it's like I'm off to the races every single day like clockwork. So it's like I have no idea this constipation. And I started working in the emergency room, and I would see what are called frequent flyers coming in. People who are on painkillers, opioids. This slows down the peristaltic movement of the intestines. And if you inhibit the peristalsis, you know the stuff that moves it from point A to point B, you end up with constipation. I got to see x-rays of people's colons. Now your colon should usually be about this big around. These people's colons were this big around. The diameter of those turds was 4 inches across, and they were stuck. So one day, I went in to interview a woman who had just come in. She was a frequent flyer. She was in for constipation. And I walk into her room, and how did I find her presented to me? Up on her hands and knees in her bed, and she says, "Doc, I'm ready."